discussion with him. I see two congressmen from Wisconsin, and there's Speaker Rob. Then of course the organizers for this wonderful program today are Dr. Mr Om Sandhu, Darshan Paliwal, my old friend Bharat Barai, and of course another old friend Putta here. I also believe we have a number of educationists amongst us. The Chancellor of University of Wisconsin, we have Dr. Vyas, we have Professor Himani Sood, and of course my colleagues from the embassy and consulate. Also the hosts of this hotel, the Kuman brothers, distinguished guests. Vaheguru Ji da Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Namaskar, Vanakkam. It's wonderful to see all of you here. I think maybe a week or 2 weeks back, I met some of you in Washington, D.C. Spring is here, and it's a season of hope, vibrancy, and possibilities. And it's wonderful to finally, as one of my earlier speakers mentioned here, to come to Chicago. Of course, I have been to Chicago in my earlier postings, but this time around, whenever we planned, I think COVID got better of us. As Amit just mentioned, for the new year I was going to be here, but the strike of Omicron that time, I had to cancel it. Also, this time, as they say, every situation has its own reality. So, it's a very important reason today that I am able to come. We are launching 2 books on Prime Minister and his inspiring journey over the last 2 decades. And this is a special moment as we celebrate the 2nd edition of the Sadbhavna program. Friends, the world is going through difficult times. You are all aware of the global pandemic, the economic recession, the geopolitical and geoeconomic developments. But I am reminded of what former US President Barack Obama said. He said, "Let me tell you something, I am from Chicago and I don't break." I too learned never give in spirit in my school, and we do need to imbibe that strong and resilient approach in current times and further our partnerships. I'm also reminded of Swami Vivekananda, especially since I'm in Chicago, and his famous address at the World Parliament of Religions. His powerful words, and I quote, "We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true." Friends, for me, it's a nostalgic moment because I've been fortunate to be an active participant of the last 8 years of journey of India under Prime Minister's leadership. So this evening, I will try to give a bird's eye view of how the Prime Minister led the transformation of our bilateral relationships with the United States. It was Winston Churchill who said, "To improve is to change. To be perfect is to change often." The changes that we have seen in this relationship in the last few years have been unprecedented. It has surpassed some of the most optimistic of our expectations. Who could have thought before 2014 that a US President will be the chief guest at India's Republic Day? that an Indian Prime Minister could surpass the NBA crowd at Madison Square Garden, that an Indian Prime Minister would get record standing ovations almost every minute throughout his address to the US Congress in 2016, that the US would grant India major defense partner relationship, which is the basis of our strong collaboration in defense and strategic sectors today. That India and US would sign all three foundational agreements in defense, as is the case today. I don't know if all of you know that India and United States do more bilateral military exercises with each other today than with any other country. Our bilateral defense trade, which was $0 in the late 90s, is more than $20 billion now. Similarly, our energy trade, which 5 years ago was $0, stands at $20 billion today. We will have summit-level Quad meetings, such robust working mechanisms on several practical areas of collaboration under the Quad. Our bilateral trade today has surpassed $160 billion in 22, despite a global pandemic, supply chain constraints, and in absence of a free trade agreement between our countries. I can go on and on. The External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jatinder, who was my former ambassador here in the US, and friends like Dr. Bharat Barai have written beautifully on many of the above aspects which I have touched. Dr. Jayashankar ends his chapter on India's foreign policy in the book so aptly, and I quote, "A foreign policy which has national interest at its core, but in a manner that is harmonized with global good." It says everything just in a sentence. Prime Minister Modi understood the potential of this relationship right at the start, having traveled widely in the US decades before he became the Prime Minister. In the United States, he saw a close friend and a strong partner who is critical to transforming the dreams and the development aspirations of nearly 1.4 billion Indians into reality. He also saw that this is one of the most consequential relationships, not just for our two countries, but for the world at large. The Prime Minister shaped the relationship with his own vision and showed that tangible outcomes are possible with focused and regular action. As a wise man has said, a leader is the one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. Friends, I have dealt with this relationship for nearly 25 years in my career. As a young congressional officer in the late 90s to Deputy Ambassador, and now as Ambassador since 2020. I often compare India-US relations in recent years to an action-packed thriller movie where by the time you realize what has happened, the story has already moved on to the next level. The pace, speed, depth, scope has been incredibly high, and it all comes from the leadership at the top. We have overcome the hesitations of history as Prime Minister Modi said in the US Congress in 2016, and I quote him, US-India relationships have overcome the hesitations of history. Comfort, candor, and convergence define our conversations. The increasing trust between our two countries is an important function of this equation today. And Prime Minister Modi played the most important role in building this trust between our two great nations. People often ask me what have been the most momentous times I recall dealing with this relationship. Two events stand apart. The Madison Square Garden in 2014 and Prime Minister's address to the US Congress in 2016. And I will explain. The MSG was a pathbreaker in every sense. It reflected the first direct widespread outreach to the diaspora, which Prime Minister Modi himself described as a living bridge. I quote him, "Connecting our two nations is also a unique and dynamic bridge of the millions of Indian Americans, all of you here." It was a deeply uniting moment for both India and the United States. The Prime Minister was the catalyst. Many of the congressmen and senators who witnessed the event called the Prime Minister a rock star. You will remember that. Many of the diaspora events have happened in capitals thereafter, but this was the first of its kind, and the excitement, I'm sure friends like Dr. Bharat Barai here would believe. And many of you may not remember, but it was at the Madison Square Garden that Prime Minister Modi announced the merger of PIO and OCI cards and several of the concessions that many of the speakers mentioned before. The US Congress address was equally special for me, having started my association with the United States with the US Congress as a congressional officer in the late 90s. As I mentioned, I recall, and you can see it on the YouTube, the number of standing ovations which the Prime Minister got. And the most touching moment was when the congressmen and the senators rushed to the Prime Minister at the end of his speech to get their copies of the speech autographed. This moment was captured by the New York Times in an iconic picture on its front page, and it said it all. Incidentally, in the Capitol, Prime Minister paid tribute to the portrait of Trustee Singh Sandhu, the first Asian American to be elected to the US Congress. And if you look closely at those videos today, you will see the then Vice President Biden in the chair, along with a friend of Darshan Dhaliwal, Paul Ryan. Friends, another vertical of foreign policy which I have been closely associated and I would like to share here, that is Prime Minister's lead in the neighborhood first policy as well. I've seen it firsthand as ambassador in Sri Lanka. There's two historic visits to Sri Lanka. One for the Vesak, which is Buddha Purnima, as well as to the upcountry, captivated the whole of Sri Lanka. In fact, the top Buddhist Mahanayake complimented Prime Minister's knowledge and respect for Buddhism in a conversation with me. His solidarity visit soon after the Easter bombing last in 2019 was equally touching. Floods in Sri Lanka in 2017, earthquake in Nepal, the Indian assistance reached these countries within 12 hours. This is a testimony that India is there for friends during any difficult time. Just a few days back, Indian aircrafts landed in Afghanistan soon after the massive earthquake, which released supplies for the distressed people. Finally, before I conclude, friends, I'll just like to say a few words regarding faith and trust, which is an important element of the second book. These are both very important elements of our lives. They are important for individuals, they are important between individuals, they are important in society, they are important between societies. We all know they are important within countries and they are important between countries. I have learned about faith at very close vision, especially from my family, which has been very strongly connected with the faith. I don't know if many of you know, but I'm sure Trustee knows that my grandfather, Trustee HTGC Sandhu, died in Lahore jail in 1926 while in British custody. His sacrifice was closely connected with the faith and trust of the people of Punjab. The SGPC, which is written in this book, was born out of that sacrifice. And today, within the Darbar Sahib complex, there is a building which honors his memory. Second, I learned very closely from my father, Trustee Bisham Singh Samundri, who was Vice Chancellor of Guru Nanak Dev University. Every morning, he used to go to Darbar Sahib. That was the route. With that, he got his strength and he was involved in establishing, since there are a number of educationals here, and that's going to be my final point, especially for Dr. Sandhu here. He was very closely associated with the establishment of Punjab Agricultural University and Guru Nanak Dev University. Those have played an important role in strengthening Punjab and giving strength and, as we say, skills to the people in Punjab. For 8 years, as I mentioned, I worked very closely with the Prime Minister. Faith and trust are an important part of his understanding and approach. And therefore, I think that second book makes a very, very important part that in India, the leadership of the Prime Minister strongly supports trust and faith, and that is the most important element in India-US relationship today. In the last 25 years, what I've seen, in fact, you will all recall during the COVID, during the second phase of COVID, it was President Biden who picked up the phone and called Prime Minister Modi and said that United States stands shoulder to shoulder with people of India. And India, whatever assistance it wants, will be provided, just like India came to the assistance of the United States in 2020. Finally, before I end, I must draw attention to the critical education and knowledge partnership between India and United States. Most of you here have come as students, and I think you are, in a sense, role models for many young in India. I'm sure, and congressmen who are here, that you may be aware that India today is a country of young. 50% of 1.4 billion people are 26 years and below. I often tell my interlocutors in White House, in the US Congress, that these young people are the best friends of the United States in India, because the young have positivity and energy. They look at United States in very positive terms. You may be aware that we have 200,000 Indian students studying here. Just like all of you, 2/3 of them are in STEM areas. They bring value and strength to the United States. That is the strong bond between our two countries. And therefore, coming from a family of educationists, both my father and mother came here in 1956 to study in Ohio State University and went back in 1958 to serve the people back in India. Education has been an important link and it continues to be an important link. And therefore, I would request people like Chancellor Sandhu, who has established the Chandigarh University, and strongly encourage through him others to take the lead in establishing innovative, cooperative education arrangements between institutions of higher education. That will not only help people of Punjab, Haryana, Himachal, North India, but also both our countries. I have personally spoken to 140 residents of US universities. There is a great excitement to get more Indian students here. But that is only one part. We have a new education policy in India which provides strong support for internationalization of education. And therefore, the universities here have a unique opportunity to collaborate with their Indian counterparts like the Chandigarh University. Not only in establishing campus-to-campus relations, intertwining of degrees, also establish local campuses. So therefore, I have amongst my team today here our education counselor. We are working very strongly and closely with the US universities, and I'm sure we will get all support from Chancellor Sandhu and other Indian universities. Finally, one of my favorite quotes from the Prime Minister is, "A nation of 1.3 billion people cannot afford to dream small." Prime Minister Modi has always encouraged us to dream big. Let us continue to dream big and work passionately towards achieving those dreams. And finally, I will close with a universal Sikh prayer of welfare, blessings and peace for all, which we all the time hear. Nanak Naam Chaddi Kala, Tere Paane. Thank you.